In March of 2002, Mr. Swan played at St. Andrew's Lutheran Church in Montemedi, Minnesota, where he was interviewed by Michael Barone, producer and host of the Minnesota public radio program Pipe Dreams.
Were the Swans musical back into the deep mists of time? Do you come from a long line of church musicians?
No, not at all. My father was a minister, and one of my brothers was an organist, but nobody else in the family could even carry a tune, so I wouldn't say we were a particularly musical family.
All right. Well, already that one of your brothers was an organist is interesting. Yeah. I've never heard of a Swan that played the organ besides Frederick. What became of him?
Well, he eventually went in the Army and was killed early in the Second World War.
Sad.
And but I remember sitting beside him on the organ bench when I was very young, watching him play and being very impressed with it all.
And because you had grown up in the church, you didn't want to rebel from what the family stood for. You wanted to keep right on with that sort of thing?
Oh, absolutely, yes, of course. I think my father was determined that I would be a minister, and it was many years before I could convince him that one could really do as much from the choir loft as from the pulpit, but he finally came around.
Fred Swan at home. At what age you were taking piano lessons first?
Yes, I started piano when I was, when I was 5.
And that was inspired by what? I mean, this was following the older brother who was doing that too?
No, I just wanted to play the piano. I would, my father, from the very time I was this high, was determined I was going to be a minister. And I was always banging on the piano, and they were always locking the piano, and I was always picking the lock, even at age 3, and banging on it. So finally, at age 5, they just gave up and sent me to study piano with the organist of his church. And that's how I got started.
And at what point did the organ take over?
Oh, I'd been taking piano, I guess, about a year, and I got to the church early for a lesson, and I heard the organ, and I'd never seen the console. It was around the corner somewhere. But I got tired of waiting and went looking for my teacher, and rounded the corner, and here was this great big thing with all these knobs and these flashing lights, and 6-year-old, I was just mesmerized. I thought, ooh, got to get my hands on that. But my feet wouldn't touch the pedals. She let me sit there. But I kept begging, so she finally bribed me, and after a while, if I had a good piano lesson, I could bang on the organ 5 minutes before I went home. And this continued for a year or so, and then finally, I guess I was about 8 or 8 and a half, she started showing me what things were and a little bit about organ technique. And this went on for a while, and then when I was at age 10, she suddenly dropped dead. Not my fault, of course. And there was no one else to play, so I became church organist at 10. And
in what town was this?
This was in Winchester, Virginia, down the Shenandoah Valley. And as I've often said, I was a very lucky kid because I never had to decide what I was going to do when I grew up. It just sort of kept happening and kept happening. And so here I am 60 years later, just hanging it all up as far as church work is concerned.
So there was an organist shortage even back then?
Well, in Winchester there was.
What have you learned about playing organ in the church that you would want to tell someone who at age 10 walks into a place like this, looks at this console, and as you did as a youngster, thinks, wow, this can be fun? What are the realities of life that you would want to tell a youngster that would open their eyes but not necessarily frighten them?
First of all, tell them go study piano. It's no good if you don't get a good piano technique first. And secondly, if you really fall in love with the organ and want to make it a career, a very important part of your life, great. But if you want to do it to make a living and don't really love it, forget it. I think some people have a very natural ability. They can sight read anything comes easily to them, but others have to really work for it. And I feel like I've worked for it. I've been very fortunate. I've been able to be in wonderful church positions, play magnificent instruments, give recitals all over the world, all that sort of thing, and mainly because I have been fortunate enough to have positions where people thought I ought to be able to play, so they'd ask me to play. But once you're there, it behooves you. You're required to work as hard as you can to try to make it worthwhile and worthy. Both at Riverside and at the Crystal Cathedral, I would very often play and direct, but if there was a piece that had an extremely complicated accompaniment, or if the choir needed extra help in some way, I would always have an assistant play the accompaniment. And once or twice with modern technology, I have even pre-taped the recording and then pushed the button and stood up and conducted. That's always good to see if the congregation's watching, if they're awake. But any of you have instruments like that where you can pre-record and the organ will play back? It's not a recording as such that comes through a speaker, but the organ itself will do exactly what you have done. You just have to remember what you've done. But two, one of the most important things is to enlist the help of the choir. Riverside Church in New York, the choir was spread all over the chancel, and the console was back in the corner. And if I really was concerned about a crescendo or a decrescendo, I would simply disappear into the console like this for a diminuendo, where I would raise way back for a crescendo. And there are little things like that. They love to watch signals. And one of the most successful, one of the best ways to have success if you're conducting from the console is to so take the choir into your confidence that they begin to take ownership of the music, and they feel that they are so dependent upon themselves, and that makes it worthwhile. But with big oratorios, and although I have played and conducted when I was younger and much more foolish, played and conducted an oratorio, I would much prefer to conduct it or play it and have someone else do the other part. When I was at the Crystal Cathedral, of course, anything visual was very important as far as the producers of the radio, of the TV broadcast were concerned. And the choir in those days had to memorize everything that they sang every Sunday, all the anthems, the hymns, the whole works, which meant that I did most of my work from memory too. And the organ's smack dab in the center, just like this, the pulpit way over there, altar way over there. And the central focus was this enormous organ and the largest draw knob console ever made, right smack in the center, and choir all around. So that we had to be very careful, the looks of things. And one thing that we were constantly urged by the program directors was that the choir must smile. And there's certain times when you cannot get exactly the kind of choral sound you want if you constantly have to be in this position. So it took me a long time to explain to them that yes, we would try to smile, but that there were times in order to get a certain sound that we couldn't always have our mouths going this way. But one of the beauties of having the choir memorized too is that they are easier to conduct. You have to look at them and give them a lot of words. So I was constantly violating one of the cardinal rules of good choral conducting, and that is I would not sing, but I would mouth along with the choir just to give them the words. And invariably the TV camera would catch me with my mouth wide open on some big round vowel sound, the sopranos looking like, throw me a fish cow. So, yes. But
that's when you'd want to go into the console.
Right. But that was a great experience, and wonderful, wonderful people, and a really very fine choir. Because they memorized the music, probably 2/3 of the choir did not read music at those days, and they did things which were very difficult and really way beyond them, but they didn't know that. And they learned largely by rote. They would bring tape recorders to rehearsal and record the rehearsal. And many of them drove 1.5 to 2 hours each way to and from the church. So they would play the tape over and over and over, going home and coming back to church, and they would memorize it.